Welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we respond to your questions on political philosophy, government incompetence, history, government incompetence, matters of culture, government incompetence, really whatever's on your mind. So let's get to today's question.
Well, by amazing coincidence, it may have to do with, what's that thing you're talking about sometimes? Oh, well, here it is. From John. He would like your opinion on the Ontario government recently giving prison guards essential services status. And he says, my opinion is that the government did not wish to deal with this union, so giving them essential services designation means that all future contracts will go to binding arbitration. And when the union gets a raise, as might possibly happen, then the government can deflect the criticism by saying, well, that wasn't us, it was the arbitrator. What do you think of that?
I think that you're exactly right. There's a whole lot of jiggery-pokery involved here, beginning with this idea of giving public sector workers the right to strike, and then when they try to exercise it, taking it away from them. That's dishonest. Either they should be allowed to strike or else they shouldn't. You can't have it both ways. But it gets a lot worse because you have this ritual kind of dance of hostility between the incumbent ministry and its employees, in which they pretend there's a big confrontation and a showdown and they hate one another, and then ways are found for the ministry to give its employees lavish raises, generous pensions, and other perks such as we can only dream of in the private sector, while pretending they didn't just do it. So I'm going to take issue. This might sound like I'm being pedantic, but it's actually, I think, very important with referring to the Ontario government. People use this language all the time, the Wynne government, the Notley government, the Trudeau government, the Harper government. The government is all three branches. It's the executive, it's the legislature, and it's the judiciary. They all go to make up government that makes rules, carries out rules, and settles disputes over rules. The executive branch is just meant to be executing the rules, but it has such a big agenda these days, it dominates the legislature, it's kind of taken over the show with the help of the judges it appoints. Why does this matter? Because the cabinet, although they're members of the legislature, are essentially the executive branch, and so are these people they're dealing with. This isn't the government against public sector workers. They're all in this together. They're all in the executive branch. They're all scooping up big handfuls of the pie that they're making the rest of us bake. And if they were seen to be doing this, we'd smell a plot. So they pretend to hate one another. But ask yourself this, because your question was about Ontario. Come the next provincial election, will the public sector unions be working to defeat the Wynne administration or to re-elect it? Right, it's a cozy arrangement. And the fact that they pretend to be hostile, so hostile they can't even negotiate, it's got to go to arbitrators, oh yes, third parties, independent of political interference, appointed by the same system, making the same lavish salaries, getting these unreasonable hourly rates or perks, rewards, again, that we in the private sector don't get. They're all in it together, and if they're all in it together, guess who they're in it together against? Right, that would be us.
So our reader there is completely right to be highly skeptical of this designation and to see the plot. How can we change that? How can we stop it from happening?
There are a couple of things that we can do. One is do not give public sector workers the right to strike. I mean, you look at what unionization rates in this country. In the public sector, they're over 70% and growing. In the private sector, they're under 16% and falling because unions kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. They're strangling government. And they're the reason why people in government have these defined benefit pensions that are unsustainably generous unless you're getting the money from somebody else's pocket. Namely, again, we chumps in the private sector who are lucky to have pensions at all, and if we do, they're defined contribution, not defined benefit. You have to stop pretending that the public sector is such a dramatic engine of wealth creation that it can afford to reward its wonderful members far more lavishly than mere mortals. So you take away this compulsory unionization, you take away the right to collect union dues from people who don't want to be in unions, if you can't bring yourself to get rid of the unionization altogether. But it's a conspiracy and restraint of trade, and it shouldn't exist. And we, the citizens, must become A, outraged at the excessive compensation in the public sector, and B, we must stop believing this ritual theater of confrontation between groups of people, all of whom, as I say, are scooping it up in quantities we can only dream of. This is not a battle inside the executive branch. It's dressed up as one, but it's a battle between the executive branch and everybody else. And if the executive branch wins, it's not just that we lose, they lose too, because the economy becomes sluggish, citizens become surly, things stop working. Government's hideously dysfunctional. The rates of depression in government and so on are far higher than elsewhere. It's an awful place to work because not just of all the confrontation and sourness, but also because of this genuine feeling that they are getting things they haven't earned. That it undermines a person's sense of self-worth, funnily enough. And to the people inside government, it's not funny. But we have to stop buying the theater. That's the first step. Stop believing it. You know, teachers, police officers, and I have great respect for both professions, virtually everybody in the public sector is paid far more than anything comparable they could get in the private sector. And it's not fair, and it doesn't work. So we shouldn't keep doing it.
And it's the same story again of it's us versus the executive. And it's the same story of Magna Carta and of all the stories of ordinary people fighting against potential tyranny from the executive is we have to simply put a stop to it.
Yeah, and that's why you've always got to watch out when someone says, oh, it's arm's length, oh, there's no political interference. What that means is the legislators we elect can't do anything about it, even if we ask them to. And as you say, that's what we've been fighting against since King John was dragged to Runnymede and forced to put the royal seal on Magna Carta. It's amazing how successful the executive branch has been lately in convincing people that freeing itself of all restraint represents an advance for them instead of finally tearing free of the controls that were imposed in 1215 and have been kept there by the tireless vigilance of citizens over the intervening 800 years. Even the judiciary, who get the most attention for this, it seems to me, are really doing it with the connivance of the executive that appoints them, and the abdication of legislators whose real goal in life is not to represent citizens, but to slither up the greasy pole until they get that coveted cabinet post and become part of the executive. It's an old story with a new twist, but that twist is of a dagger stuck firmly into our wallets, which is pretty much where King John was trying to put it in the first place.
Exactly. So déjà vu all over again. Thanks very much for that, folks. If you would like to play along and ask your question, the URL on your screen right now will lead you to the page where we'll give you all the instructions on how to ask your question of the professor. Thanks, and see you next time.